And so getting started, on solid footing before you look at any particular solution or vendor, there are a couple ideal thoughts to keep in mind. And one, obviously, is that you start with a strategy and a plan. And frequently, you already have a vision coming out of the firm that you're exiting from to build your new business. You have a vision in your mind of where you want to be and how you want this to look, both when you hit the ground as well as where you'd like to be looking out 36 months or even 5 years. A couple things in the independent world is that there really is no Swiss Army knife. Frequently, you may be coming out of an organization where everything was in one silo or one bucket and available for you a thumbprint away. You can recreate that same environment for you and your clients, but frequently it's not from one sole provider. And as Chris mentioned, one of my mantras is integration. And you'll see as we progress through these slides that integration is probably one of the single most important components of building your systems in your new practice. And my own philosophy, just from my experience, has always been to keep it simple. I myself have gotten drawn into whether it be existing technology or exotic technology, and I've kind of overstated what I want to accomplish, and I forgot that there were some fundamental processes and workflows that I needed to achieve, and you can get lost in the mix and sometimes even make a bad vendor choice. So keeping it simple really ties back to having your strategy and plan documented. And then training, you can never have enough. Frequently I'll spend time with businesses who say these programs just don't work for us, and we take a slightly deeper look into a practice and the programs, and we find that perhaps that there was only a leveraging of 5 or 10% of the solution, and that really the answer was in the existing application, and it was a matter of training and finding a way to map what you and your staff do over to the program. So these are really key steps to think about as you proceed. From a strategy and a planning perspective, I've drawn a diagram that I've used before, and this is a frequent thing that I do, is assemble kind of a very broad, high-level workflow to lay out what a practice can look like with the tools that they're choosing. And this could be 7 or 8 different vendors paired together, or it could be 1 or 2, depending on your particular business. But having this strategy and a plan really helps you make sound decisions when you move to due diligence with vendors. And you don't have to draw a diagram like this. I've literally sat on the back of a notebook or on a cocktail napkin and drawn little boxes and mapped out, here's your CRM, here's your financial planning, here's your analytics. So it doesn't have to look glorious, but it has to be a sound plan that maps back to your vision. So thinking through what happens in your practice. Chris laid the groundwork, and now you've got your registrations, and your clients are set because you've got the proper documents in place and processes in place to proceed. And now you need those mechanisms to move forward and process business. So from an operations perspective, and more so leading into what Andy's going to talk about, a marketing perspective, you need some systems that can pivot back and forth and handle those workflows, whether those are new ones that you're just designing or old ones that you're bringing with you to your new business. And so in this particular example, we're looking at some of the key points where you interact with your clients on the back end, and frequently also then they interact with your systems to get information. And you'll be able to look at this in more detail at a later time if you look at the slides. I believe that this evening they'll be up on advisorsforadvisors.com. You can see from this diagram also that integration really comes into play here because if you've established a set of vendors that solve these problems, you want to be able to work through these applications in collaboration in conjunction with one another to get business done. As I mentioned before, there really isn't a Swiss Army knife of a single vendor that can answer all of those solutions at once. you really want to focus in the independent space on those vendors who have picked the major and said, this is what we're expert at. We know how to deliver financial planning to you. And one thing I'll say about the independent space, in the past 5 to 7 years, these tools have really matured, not only from a technical perspective. If I step back and look at it from a technology view, these tools have matured phenomenally from the perspective of business continuity, security, backup, redundancy, and reliability. 5 years ago, 7 years ago, most people didn't even blink if someone tried to sell you a web-based solution. It was a pretty tough sell. And now there are a lot of folks literally giving up all of their software at the server level in their offices and saying, I can outsource this and control my costs and still have confidence that this is up 98% or 99% of the time throughout the year. So these, from a technical perspective, these vendors have matured. And even perhaps more importantly to you as a business owner, they've matured on the business side. So they may have come at it and said, we know how to build technology for you, but over the last 7 years of working with independent practices, they've also almost got a minor degree in your business processes, and those are showing up in their programs, and that understanding of not you buying the program and doing it how the vendor thinks you should, but the vendor actually catering the program to how you work. And many of these programs can be that flexible. Certainly there's a number of processes you need to define, and I list those out here. And it's a natural graduation that when you define these processes, which in all senses are your requirements for what you need as a vendor, they map pretty naturally down to the tools listed below. So CRM, planning, reporting, research and analysis. So it's an interesting and fairly straightforward exercise to go through, and helps you approach vendors when you go into due diligence mode with a lot more confidence that I know what I need. I now need to find a solution that maps to it. And as I mentioned before, integration is central. My mantra is, enter it once, don't touch the data again. And I use an extremely elementary example here. There are a number of examples we can go into, and I'm certainly willing to answer any questions about that. But just at its simplest level, a prospect is entered in your CRM system, and when you convert that prospect to a client, there's a number of human steps you're going to take, but there's also a number of technology steps you're going to take. It needs to get to financial planning. You need to be able to load previous statements and other data into a research and analysis tool, and then you need to be able to assemble a deck of paperwork that customer will approve and ultimately that you'll manage for them. And the idea of integration is that you should really only enter the core information once, and it should then syndicate its way across all the solutions you use. And there are a number of applications that, as part of that maturity process they've gone through, they've opened their eyes and realized we need to integrate with as many partners as possible. When it comes to simplicity and training, these two really would be the next things that I evangelize after integration. And that is, if you stick to your plan, you've documented your processes, you've written your requirements, you know what you need to run your business, stick to your plan. It delivers not only simplicity for you when it comes to working with vendors and executing business on a daily basis, but it delivers consistency to clients as they come back to you repeatedly, whether that be in the review process, subsequent business, or bringing in referrals or other family members. There's a consistency and a confidence that delivers that to them. It's very subtle, but it's also a very strong thread that you deliver to your clients. And on the training front, absolutely, these vendors will offer you a multitude of ways to train. Many components of that is free of charge, but I would also urge you to consider looking at the components that come from some of the vendors for a fee, because frequently that's what introduces your team into the more advanced approaches to dealing with their solutions, and especially when it comes to integration. So there's a a good natural graduation you can go to as you ease yourself into this new business and into these new solutions. You can scale and grow very confidently because you know you're following that plan. And then this really circles back to something that Chris said that I think is really critical, and that is that I would take a look annually at both your internal processes as well as your providers, and really do, whether it be informal or formal, really do a scorecard, not just yourself as the business owner and the principal, but with your team, and really identify and communicate amongst yourselves how can we continue to grow efficiently, and more importantly, your vendors need to know what they can put on their roadmaps to change. So there's a lot of opportunities there, and that really circles back to training because it keeps you in touch with your providers and keeps your staff up on the latest releases from them.
Okay. Blaine, question for you. In terms, and you touched on this, but I'd just like to hear a little bit more. In terms of documenting your processes, why is that so important, and how are you going to use that information in technology systems?
Well, certainly, documenting your processes, most of us walk around in our daily and weekly and monthly lives with our processes in our heads. We know how to do what we do, and we know all the little shortcuts and how to evade obstacles. But with a new or transitioning business, what's really critical to get everybody on the same page is to actually write those steps down, because it will paint, when you look at those steps in totality, it paints a whole different picture than might have been assumed when you go to choose a technology tool. That's kind of answer A. Answer B that goes in conjunction with that is the fact that these tools now, as they've matured, they actually have either semi or fully automated workflow capabilities. So for instance, I'll pick on one of the vendors you mentioned, Redtail. They have a workflow engine within it that allows you to say, these are the 10 steps I do when I have a new client prospect. And if you put those steps into the CRM system, it will trigger requests for you to send an email or make a phone call. It'll put calendar activities on the calendar. And then these steps start to carry over to your other applications. So documenting is really critical. That upfront exercise really paves the road for a very smooth transition on the technology front.